I also want to let you know there is an induction loop available for any of you who might need it. Okay, so if people still come in, if you just take a seat, that'd be really good. Right, okay, well, so thank you all for coming tonight to what promises to be a very exciting debate on multiculturalism in the UK. And does it have a future? The debate has been very kindly organised by the Prisma newspaper, whose director we have here tonight, Monica Marin. The Prisma is an independent online newspaper, bilingual newspaper, which was founded in 2010. The paper has now reached, after almost 3 years, a readership of almost 200,000, and it is run entirely by volunteers, of which are around 160 now. The paper supports very strongly the notion of freedom of expression, of religious, cultural beliefs, the right to inform and to be informed, and most importantly, it believes in a world without borders, that is, a world where multiculturalism can exist.
One of the motor forces for calling the debate tonight was the statement by the Prime Minister a while ago that multiculturalism in the UK has failed. And that was quite a challenging, controversial statement. And it was felt by the Prisma newspaper that it would be worthwhile to contribute to a debate to really ask the question, has multiculturalism failed? Is it possible? And that actually we'll be able to contribute to the promotion of policies and initiatives to promote multiculturalism in this country. So the debate today will take the form of 6 panellists, one of whom isn't here yet, Jeremy Corbyn MP, and he will sit here hopefully when he arrives, but we didn't want to keep you waiting any longer. Each of the panellists will speak for 6 minutes, and then the moderator will moderate the discussion, contributions from the floor, questions, comments. Either you can make comments of your own, or you can ask questions of the panellists, whatever will help the debate. She'll give you instructions on that when that comes. I'd like to introduce Monica Marin, who is the founder and the managing director and editor-in-chief of the Prisma. She's a Colombian journalist. She specialises in politics and human rights. She's also the founder of the magazine in Colombia as well, for which she's nominated the best contribution to Colombian journalism. And she's been involved in independent journalism since then. So I'd like to please welcome Monica Marin. Thank you.
It's good to briefly introduce the rest of the panellists before I hand over to them. We have, here on my left, we have Nigel Pocock, who he's a social scientist and lecturer at a large number of institutions here in the UK, and he's also a consultant to various bodies which are concerned with the legacy of slavery. Then we have Mike Jensen, here on my right. Mike is an author, journalist and lecturer. He's currently also a part-time lecturer in journalism at the University of West England, and he's been a director of the journalism ethics charity MediaWise since 1966. Then we have Zita Holborn. Zita is a trade union and community activist. She's also the national co-chair of Black Activists Rising Against Cuts, FARC, and a member of One Society, Many Cultures. She's also a contributor to the book Defending Multiculturalism. On the far right there we have Abdullah al Andalusi, who's an international speaker, thinker and intellectual activist for Islam and Muslim affairs, and he has researched many subjects including Islamic revivalism and theology. Next to Abdullah is Claudio Chipana Gutierrez, who is a Peruvian philosopher who has carried out extensive research on Latin America, migration and multiculturalism. He's a member and former coordinator of the Latin American Recognition Campaign here in London. And finally, Jeremy, who's not here yet, Jeremy Corbyn MP, who is actually tonight's host. Jeremy has been a Member of Parliament since 1933, and his work focuses on human rights and the needs of the poor, specifically on issues concerning affordable housing and asylum seekers. Jeremy has attended and spoken at a number of human rights peace conferences around the world. So I'm now going to hand you over to our panellists. Just to let you know, if you want more information about our panellists or anything on tonight, I think you've all been handed out a leaflet, so there's more information there. So I'm going to hand you over to Monica, who's our first speaker for tonight.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this debate that the Prisma is doing today. There is no problem with multiculturalism as such. It has existed since ancient times, even though the term arose only recently. It's a necessary and unavoidable fact of life. It has its own dynamic and its own difficulties resulting from the interaction of different cultures. Although its effects are different depending on the climate of the time, whether of rejection or assimilation, still its power to enrich the host culture is undeniable. The problem with multiculturalism arises when it ceases to be a social process and becomes a political weapon. This is especially favored by politicians and governments. Sorry for my pronunciation, I'm struggling still with that. And we are speaking particularly about the United Kingdom here, which has made multiculturalism a controversial subject of the debate. I mean controversial for those who think that the many languages, customs, and traditions of the city do not enrich it when it mixed. It's controversial because it has been subtly mixed up with the idea of immigration, at least according to David Cameron and other politicians. Confusing them is useful for creating the belief that immigration is the cause of the economic crisis, or if not the cause of, then an obstacle in the way of solving it. But the best strategy is to blame immigrants for the problems that exist in society. It has been proved historically that importing a cheap, well-trained workforce has allowed capitalist economies to maintain themselves and grow. And statistics show immigrants have not taken jobs away from native residents. Immigrants did not cause the economic crisis. They spent most of their time trying to survive, in some cases after being forced to flee their homelands as refugees. Their main concern is sending money to home, to feed their families and saving for their own return. A different way of attacking immigrants is blaming them for terrorism and urban violence. This works well because it spreads hatred and fear over faiths and ethnic groups. Finally, it nurtures the idea that there is no alternative to expelling people for reasons of national security. And when these arguments do work, there is another, which is to accuse them of refusing to integrate, creating ghettos and denigrating our British society. In the end, they want us to change instead of them. This anti-multiculturalist discourse is easy to build and easier to be accepted and believed because on one hand, the economic crisis and the fear of terrorism are present in everybody's mind. And on the other hand, because this society, mainly in London, despite having a multicultural tradition, also has strong veins of racism and intolerance for other cultures. Even among those who don't accept this intolerant discourse or who feel at home in a city with many cultures and cuisines, Caribbean rhythms, salsa, flamenco, very few people speak against the enemies of multiculturalism. The anti-multiculturalism is simply a xenophobic discourse hidden behind a nice mask of nationalism promoting neoliberal policies. The enemies of multiculturalism are not only right-wing conservatives or religious fundamentalists, but those who keep quiet, who remain passively indifferent, even among immigrants themselves. The media also contribute to the problem. Media who feel no responsibility to report honestly on a topic like immigration. Media which do not inform readers about the manipulation of politicians or simply echo their arguments. Media that never point out that capitalism is multicultural when it's a question of opening new markets, extracting natural resources, building mega projects, and importing cheap labor. Media which doesn't talk about how multiculturalism ceases to be convenient when it's about accepting and respecting other culture, of opening doors to immigrants instead of stigmatizing and deporting them. The Prisma, we believes in multiculturalism, in open borders for people and goods. We believe in diversity because it's something necessary. Multiculturalism has no failure. There are things that need changing, but multiculturalism as a social process has no failure. It requires an effort in Western culture to admit that its foundations are not the only ones that deserve respect. But people from other cultures also need to make the effort to understand that all cultures have their religions, their worldviews, and their stories. Anti-immigrant propaganda, which is also anti-multiculturalism and racist, propagates thanks to the government and some section of the media who create false perception that multiculturalism has failed, that it's dangerous, and that it causes violence. What is needed is not just an interaction, but dialogue, a dialogue in government and between the communities that arrive and those that host them, and especially because of fundamentalism, a dialogue between religious communities. Human rights do not belong only to one culture, but not to all, and they must be defended and promoted in all, even though their laws are different. In a country which accepts democracy, multiculturalism must be listened to. People themselves must participate and decide, but on the basis of correct information and understanding. True multiculturalism inspires and enriches. It learns from others, fuses together and transforms. Each person must be free to celebrate their own culture, but from within the society they have arrived in, respecting that also, and learning from it. Maybe the problem is that we only tolerate diversity. If instead of tolerating we have accepted those from other cultures, this debate tonight will not be necessary.
Good evening, everybody. I've just 6 minutes, and I want to talk to you this evening about mental health issues in relation to multiculturalism. This is important to me because multiculturalism has been put forward as a strategy for enhancing self-esteem of oppressed groups by encouraging them to value their culturally constructed identities. Has this worked? In some ways I think it has, but in other ways it has failed. But that is the reality. Truth is always partial, but we've got to constantly work at it because it constantly needs refining. In traditional, more collective cultures, politics, science and religion are one, and worldviews are a unity. In Western, in Western society, there is a dualism of facts and values. Everything tends to be described in statistics, so that people won't be offended. But there are still, of course, some people who are offended by statistics as being authoritarian. This presents a real problem of culture conflict and socialisation, but both types of culture see only in part and need to develop sharpened problem-solving skills, broadened outlooks, and more self-accepting self-love as opposed to self-centeredness. This returns us to mental health issues. In the Caribbean, there were allegedly 4 times as many diagnoses of schizophrenia as in the UK, but, and this may well be highly significant, there were 12 times as many diagnoses of schizophrenia amongst African Caribbean people born in the UK. There seems to be 2 factors operating here. The first is a sense of alienation which leads to the expressive language which triggers a schizophrenic episode. The second is misdiagnosis. Misunderstandings due to poor communication skills both ways seems to be very evident here, not to mention the fact that consultants apparently have only 1 hour in 1 year in which to assess a person. So what does that tell us about assessment? I suggest that poor communication skills and Western clinical and technocratic approaches to health can be very damaging to well-being and identity, and that at the heart of this can be a misdiagnostic labelling. Made in 1 hour, 1 year, people can be labelled for life, all because of poor communication skills. There's also a less well-known field of research called epigenetics, which means added onto genetics. It's been known for some years that environmental traumas cause mutations that throw switches on genes, and after 9/11, for example, that post-traumatic stress disorder has been found to lead to inherited effects on adolescent boys and women in pregnancy, which then are likely to be passed on in the form of gene mutations and inherited illness for possibly several generations. So what's that got to do with multiculturalism? Namely, that history has profound effects on modern African Caribbean populations. This is not just the labelling involved, but the biology as well. The British and Portuguese in particular contributed massively to trauma and family dysfunction on precisely these extremely vulnerable age groups in the West Indies, and will undoubtedly emerge that post-traumatic stress disorder is part of this legacy for social and mental health. So language and education, as well as genetics and biology, are very important if there is to be access to health and well-being. Health, good or bad, is a result of a dynamic relationship between the social, mental and physical. There is more to health than an interview in the clinic, for Westerners and non-Westerners alike. What is needed is a more personal approach to public health, and it may well be that we can learn something there from more traditional communities than the Western approach. This is expressive of the culture conflict between Western individualism and traditional cultures. The word individualism has 2 meanings, and they're quite different. One is positive and the other is negative. The first one is selfishness, a me-first culture, because you deserve it, which you've seen on television many times, I'm sure, because you deserve it. The other one is to do with an individualism that represents the rights of the individual. The first is highly destructive, and Western culture could learn much from traditional cultures about family responsibility on this count, especially as some communities within the next generation experience high levels of dementia. One of the saddest of all illnesses, and this is related to poor education, heart disease, sedentary living, poor diet, and many other factors, and that's something we really must address, I think. It's very important indeed. We address multiculturally. Lack of English is conducive to this unhealthy living pattern because it increases difficulty of access to information. Learning to care for our parents is also a warning to a consumer-orientated and self-centred Western youth to learn to develop more responsibility for others than themselves in the longer-term future. Conversely, and finally, individual rights are essential to democracy, and to abandon them is a step too far, especially as regards the rights of women and children to be protected from abuse, and not just sexual abuse. Openness is crucial to both social and mental health. We need discussion, not closure. We need a worldview as well as public facts. In summary then, multiculturalism is with us to stay, at least until globalisation leads to a monochrome culture and everybody is mixed race. Maybe 500 years from now. From this, it is evident to me that multiculturalism is a fluid concept that needs to be adjusted and sharpened with each passing generation. Each culture has things in common, things that are unhelpful and things that bring health benefits. What we do not want to encourage is a multi-phrenic self that is so divided and confused about identity that it has no idea about who it is. Instead, we want a society of psychologically mature people, responsible for oneself, responsible for others across cultures, realistic, self-accepting, with long-term but flexible goals. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Notice that today Express is proud again today with this headline. I do hope none of you bought it. But it's a nice little reminder of why we're here. A better deal for decent Britons. I wonder who they mean. I was born into a large Irish Catholic family in 1947, and I spent my early years living close to a garrison town, a place called Camberley in Surrey. And as members of the Catholic parish, we were also part of a subset of another ghetto community. I can remember being stoned by children from what were nearby schools, what we called non-Catholics, while I was still in my early days in primary school. And you'd be surprised at the levels of anti-Catholicism that still existed then. I've written about the similarities between my childhood and that of many Muslim youngsters today in a piece I call Bigotry Begins at Home, and there's a message in the title there. Cut off from the mainstream and convinced of our own right to belong, we knew that we were different and we didn't mind. We had our own ways to confirm our identity, and we knew that the history we were taught at schools didn't tell the whole story. The heroes and heroines of British imperial history were villains to us. Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, Cromwell and Churchill. Never mind the Protestant martyrs under Queen Mary, we had the 40 martyrs to vindicate us. Those who objected because we still believed in an Ireland united and free, and hated us because our first loyalty was to Rome, did not faze us. We were part of a universal church and a nation which had not enslaved other nations, but which had sent nurses and priests and writers and troubadours to bring help and joy to others. Of course, these are thoughts from a ghetto, for the most part a fairly comfortable home counties ghetto, but more or less a closed world. I didn't actually talk to non-Catholic children until I was in my mid-teens. And some local clubs and activities were still out of bounds to Catholics. But of course we had one major advantage over other groups growing up in similar ghettos in other parts of Britain: the colour of our skin. We were also closer to the host community in many other ways, especially language. As in other upwardly mobile Irish families, all traces of Irish accent, or indeed any other accent, were obliterated in the struggle for acceptance, if not assimilation. Sadly, many Irish youngsters took the dire step of joining racist groups like the National Front, just to win approval. But acceptance, to and for what? As the 50s became the 60s and then the 70s, Britain was beginning to wake up to the fact that it was now more evidently a multicultural society, whether it liked it or not. It was also a time when it was the Irish who were the terrorists. And why should it not like it? Well, incipient racism for one, but we'll come back to that. A nation state that's developed over centuries through the exploitation of other countries, cultures and economies, in my view, has no right to object to the presence of others in its midst. You cannot collect pebbles on the beach and then complain that there are too many stones in your room. In a very real sense, Britain has volunteered to become a multicultural society. By imposing its own laws, customs and culture through colonisation, and by inviting its newly claimed subjects to assist in the reconstruction of Britain after the war, it has undermined any argument of the most rampant racists can come up with for denying the rights and identities of many cultures that now invigorate the British landscape. And the big problem is that the incipient racism of the true Brit is the main reason why multiculturalism is both undeveloped and under threat. Most Irish who came here in the 19th and 20th century had lost their own language thanks to oppressive English laws. More recent immigrants have brought their languages with them. And there does lie a problem. Because of the new ghettos form at the start of a process which will eventually dissolve after 1 or 2 generations, the hostility and ignorance of those around them prevent both intercultural communication and even integration. We're supposed to adopt the British way in the days of empire under threat of violence. What's the big deal about them accepting some of our ways without coercion? I think multiculturalism is under threat because it's too much like hard work. I find it very sad to visit Pakistani families who've lived here for maybe 40 years and find elders who still don't speak English. I find it harder to accept that racist stereotypes still gain credence through the popular press and the pub. I hate the knowing look from the bus driver when he catches my eye in a silent, sickening, dismissive sneer about the Chinese, Somali, Jamaican or Bangladeshi who just got on before me. And I hate the self-satisfied attitudes of those who patronise the strangers in their midst by celebrating their exoticism but never invite them into their homes. What's missing from the equation is an admission, perhaps on both sides, that they do not have all the answers, and that their own identity is to a large extent dependent on the acceptance of and by the other. Travel has certainly broadened my mind and my knowledge, and taking an interest in politics and culture of other people and places provides a more meaningful basis for communication with my neighbours, but wanting to know more and wanting to share is the key. Multiculturalism does it for me, and it does it for my children who find a white monoculture both strange and disturbing. Mouthing off about the failures and dangers of multiculturalism is both sinister and defeatist. You cannot embrace the global economy without acknowledging all that goes with it. Whether we like it or not, it is all of us who make the world go round. No one is my master now, and our difference is a grist to the mill. Multiculturalism is here to stay. Get over it.
Greetings. I'd like to start by thanking the prisoner for tabling this quite timely event, actually, given what's happening currently with the government. For multiculturalism to not exist in the UK, somebody would have to wave a magic wand and undo centuries of British history: colonial rule, migration, invasion, enslavement. Multiculturalism can't simply disappear overnight. When Cameron made his speech in Munich, he spoke about state multiculturalism. And state multiculturalism is not something I recognise. I recognise my multiculturalism. I recognise the multiculturalism in the communities I live in. Multiculturalism is embraced in all aspects of our life, things that we take for granted and we don't think about on an everyday basis. And that includes music, it includes fashion, it includes design, it includes our language. If you look at our language, look how many French words there are in the British language. Look at what Britain's most popular dishes are. They're not Welsh or English or Scottish, they're Italian and Asian. When Cameron says multiculturalism has failed, Cameron's not talking about the multiculturalism of his upper class cronies and groups that he belongs to. He's not talking about the failure of the culture of Oxbridge or Sloane Rangers or his chums in Parliament. He's talking about the cultures of migrant and non-white communities. That's who he's targeting. If multiculturalism had failed, then I'd expect him down to see him cross over to East London where I live and drink a pint in the Boleyn pub and step into the mosque that's next door to that pub. You know, multiculturalism is all of us. It's not just about the bits that Tories want to pick out and say are a threat to our societies. But when Cameron made his speech in February of 2011 in Munich, he made it on the day that the EDL, the English Defence League, were marching in Britain. And he linked it to terrorism and he promoted Islamophobia. And that's quite dangerous and irresponsible for a government leader to do. I think that multiculturalism is what makes us strong, it's what makes Britain vibrant. I don't see it as a weakness, I see it for a strength. The evidence is here, right here, isn't it, in this room? Look around this room. This shows us that multiculturalism is not failing, it's very much alive. You can't expect people to assimilate to a fake norm, because what is normal British culture? It doesn't exist, does it? It's a fusion of centuries of different people coming to this country and contributing to British society that's developed into the multicultural society that we live in. And we've just seen yesterday further attacks announced in the Queen's speech on migrant communities. Migrants have been referred to as benefit tourists, and this is simply not true. Migrant workers contribute to the British economy. They claim less benefits than British people do, and they often stay for short periods in the UK. And the government wants to restrict their access to housing benefit and to health and the NHS. But those same migrant workers are the workers that are contributing taxes to this country. They're addressing skills shortages in this country. And when he's talking about, you know, migrants coming over, he's talking about particular migrant groups coming over. Because he's not complaining about people coming from New Zealand or Australia or Canada or anywhere like that. He's talking about Eastern Europe, he's talking about Asian, African communities coming to the UK. And the claims that our welfare state is too generous is simply not true either. UK's got one of the least generous benefit systems in Europe. I think that all the mainstream parties are pandering to UKIP at the moment, and I think that's of a major concern for us. I think it's scaremongering, it's dishonest, and what it does is it empowers those people that hold racist views, that actually might hold those racist views down and not express them. It empowers them to express those views. And what that can link to, and we know that in times of economic crisis, racism increases, and that's what it can do. It can lead to racist attacks racist attacks increasing on migrant people, black communities, Asian communities, because we're the ones that are being scapegoated to take the focus of the real cause of the economic crisis and the failure of the Condemned Coalition to address the issues. I want to go back to, you know, the speech in Munich. After the speech in Munich, a group of us, which included myself and Jeremy, we had a letter in The Guardian that followed 7,000 signatures. And we produced this book, which is called Defending Multiculturalism. And I'd recommend anybody who's interested in defending multiculturalism to get this book. There's contributions by academics, by politicians, by artists, and by trade unionists. And I've included in my contribution a guide to the trade union movement on how they should defend multiculturalism and why they should defend multiculturalism. I think that, to finish, because I think my time is approaching the end, it's not in the gift of a politician to simply close down multiculturalism. And whilst the government may try to restrict our freedoms through legislation, what they can't do is restrict our hearts and minds. And it's up to us, you know, what we have to look at, I think, in the discussion that happens after this is, what are we going to do collectively as a community, a multicultural community, to defend multiculturalism and counter the lies and myths that are out there. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the most gracious, most merciful. Thank you, Prisma, for holding this event. My name is Abdullah al Andalusi, but you'll probably refer to me as the controversial one after this. Let's take a look at the word multiculturalism. What is culture? What does it actually do? I think culture provides a common language of interaction between people, and to do this, it posits values, perspectives, and beliefs which are shared between a community, of which kind of to facilitate exchange between them, like currency, as they say. Now, to have true multiculturalism, we must have a society that is prepared to accept different views and actions. And in a liberal country, this is not fully possible. Although liberalism tolerates superficial differences like language, food, clothing, and spiritual beliefs, it does not tolerate beliefs which are political or legal in nature, which goes against its criteria for judging right from wrong, which I suppose would be secular humanism, a very kind of materialistic way of judging whether something is good or bad. And liberalism has never been neutral. It's not neutral. It's never been neutral. And as the Prime Minister David Cameron, himself said, that a passively tolerant society says to its citizens, as long as you obey the law, we will leave you alone. It stands neutral between different values, but a genuinely liberal country does much more. It believes in certain values and actively promotes them. And then it says to all its citizens, this is what defines us as a society. To belong here is to believe in these things. So liberalism has never been neutral. And its insistence on a kind of one law for all means that multiculturalism really can't be fully realizable if you have this very kind of almost insistent one law for all, without accommodating different people's perspectives, beliefs, and their values, their ways of living, their conception of good, as they say. And I think this is the problem with multiculturalism, is the problem that liberalism has with multiculturalism. Not the idea or the desire amongst people who genuinely want to live in a plural world, which I think most people here are. Those people don't have a problem with it, but those who are insistent on particular liberal values will have a problem with how people live their lives. Now, this doesn't just apply to immigrants or minorities, but it can also apply to indigenously accepted faiths like Christianity. So Christianity also faces problems in a liberal society. So we know about Catholic adoption agencies being forced to go against their conscience and adopt children out to people whose lifestyle they disagree with from a religious perspective, but they're forced to close, otherwise they can't, they won't be able to operate. Christian hotel owners are prosecuted for refusing to give rooms to couples, of which, again, according to them, goes against their conscience. Now it's their private property; they can do as they wish, as long as they're not harming anyone or physically attacking anyone. Surely you would permit them to act according to their own religious conscience. What about, the prayers are banned at council meetings. We're seeing faith symbols are being taken off government buildings. Not all government buildings as yet, but there's many campaigns and quite some successes in that regard. We see that in the Muslim perspective, the Muslim communities and experiences are that people who have political opinions, some of them might be strong political opinions, but are they also prosecuted even when they don't actually advocate them publicly? So the poetess Samina Malik was sentenced over extremist poetry that she never published. They found her in a house and they punished her for it. Muslims and Christians are arrested for proselytizing because it was deemed to be homophobic. Again, I don't advocate people who should be persecuted for their sexual desires, but I don't advocate people should be persecuted for following their religious conscience either. We see that Azhar Ahmed was prosecuted for making Facebook comments because these comments were deemed to be offensive in some manner. Although, of course, if you attack religious symbols or you attack religious ideas or you offend a assault community, that's okay generally in society. You can do that, but if you actually make comments which are against the social taboos and norms then you'll be punished for this. And we also see that there's other forms of kind of non-state implemented legislation, such as banning religious speakers from platforms at universities and community centres. So these are kind of the kind of problems that we face with multiculturalism. And as I said, people who generally desire pluralism, and many of them I see tonight, will have no problem with people having different opinions, living by their conscience. But if you believe in this liberalism where everyone has to abide by a universal set of rights which you impose upon them, even though they might not exactly agree as to what is good or what is bad, they have their own conception of what is a good life, then we see these problems. Now, as a Muslim, I'm not calling for the implementation of Sharia in the UK, as people always, as the media like to portray, but rather, or at least not in the penal system. But what I would say is that Christians, Jews and Muslims and atheists and everyone else should not be coerced to act against our conscience, and we shouldn't be punished for when we do act upon our conscience. Now, as I said, the Sharia itself there's many misconceptions about the Sharia, and there's not enough time for me to go through all of them. We believe in spiritual equality between men and women. We actually promote open debate, criticism. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had the first Muslim-Christian debate, and he was criticised to his face, and that was no problem with that. The Christians were even allowed to pray Christian prayers in the mosque before leaving because it was a bit late. Sharia does not interfere in people's lives, in their private life, in their own house. We don't interfere what you do. You can do whatever you want. No one's going to kind of tap your phones and see what you're doing in your own house, unlike maybe some modern societies. But I would like to posit a possible alternative model for the future of multiculturalism, and that would be the Islamic approach to multiculturalism, whereby we allow plurality of legal systems that we saw in the Islamic period, medieval period. Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, they had their own legal systems. They could refer to them, their own penal legal systems. We had Zoroastrians engaging in self-marriages, whether you marry yourself, the peak of vanity perhaps, but Islam actually accepted that, because we can't impose Sharia on people who don't believe in the Sharia. We didn't say one law for all, you must have Sharia. No, we believe in plurality of people living together. Al Andalus, Islamic Spain, Iberia, where my surname is from. This is the historically tried and tested examples of multiculturalism. So I think that for multiculturalism to fully exist, people need to fully accept others to live according to their conscience, and not interfere to the extent that there is what you're seeing today is this rising totalitarian flavour to the discourses on minorities in Western society. And I think we can look at historical models as a good example for our future. Thank you.
More than 20 years ago, I only intended to stay 1 week to attend the Congress, the National Congress in Brighton. But I was attracted by London, or by this country, by this culture, especially for one reason. Well, not necessarily for the food or the weather, but for its multicultural character. It was incredible, it was amazing, coming from a different experience, to see people around the world, here living in one city like London. By the way, London possibly is the most multicultural city in Europe, or maybe in the world. It's disputing New York, this title. The thing is, how can a city like London could be a vibrant city, loophole-looking city, with this rich tapestry of diversity in different cultures, religion, faith, food, languages, and traditions, and at the same time to be a city with this kind of development. To me, that is the most clear meaning that multiculturalism didn't fail. So this development of London is precisely due to the presence of this multi-ethnic population, which in the census of 2011 showed that the majority in this city, more than 50% for the first time in the history of this country. Talking about multiculturalism, we are living what is called the backlash against multiculturalism, especially in the last 10 years, when in 2001 occurred this riots in northern England, and then it all started blaming multiculturalism as the source of division, antagonism, self-enclosed communities. But the thing is, there are evidence that multiculturalism is still alive and kicking, and I would say not just because we see a lot of people from different cultures. Multiculturalism is not only diversity or pluralism, it's more than that. It's the construction, a new polity, a new citizenry, or if you like, the vision of a new nation where you can, through a new social contract, establish the dialogue and the relationship between the majority and the minority in this country. I would disagree in one point of what I heard from Sita, that state multiculturalism is not part of the problem and part of the solution in this debate about what will be the future for Britain. The reason is because if the state doesn't take any responsibility about constructing these social bonds, about addressing diversity, who else? The market, the people themselves. That's the argument of the so-called big society or the conservative, where the state minimizes their role, they have no responsibility, their cuts, their budgets are minimum, and there is no program to help minorities to integrate. So multiculturalism is one way of integration, the democratic, the best way. Yes, it's a kind of liberal, it's a liberal ideology which is behind multiculturalism, but this kind of liberalism is different to the classical one, hierarchical, undemocratic, top-down way of integrating minorities. This country is made up of migrants. British history is made of people coming here to live, sharing values, sharing traditions from around the world. Before, yes, many people came as invaders, you know the history, Viking, Romans, Anglo-Saxon, but before, in the past 200 years, we had a variation of the patterns of people coming here. Before the World War II, we have mostly Europeans, and after that you have people from the former colonies of Britain. So today, we have big challenges about what could be the future, but multiculturalism, to me, holds the key for a real and sustainable pathway to improving people's life and improving the nation as not a single unity with a uniform society, but a plural one and democratic with equal opportunity for all, where everyone can express according to the principles of the freedom of expression, everyone choosing the way they want to live, but at the same time with duties and rights, sharing everybody traditions of their own. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeremy Corbyn, MP Islington North, and thank you for inviting me tonight. And I'm sorry if you had any problems getting in the room. I hope you didn't. If did, I apologise. No, you didn't, well, I don't need to apologise. Thank you. As you'll see from the beautiful painting behind us, this history, the history of Britain in this building is a very strange thing. As you come into the building through St Stephen's entrance, if you look on your left going out or right coming in, you'll see a picture, a beautiful painting of Sir Thomas Roe presenting his credentials to the Mughal Emperor in India. And the legend underneath it says, by his firmness of hand and his diplomacy, he established British influence in India. The fact that the palace was surrounded by British troops, the fact that it was a colonial occupation in the name of commercial enterprise is completely ignored. It's this kind of grand illusion that all British influence all over the world was somehow or other beneficial and good. And the slave trade is kind of written out of it, and many, many other aspects of history as well. And behind me we've got Alfred inciting the Saxons to defeat the Danes. He was actually totally unsuccessful in doing that, but that is left off the painting, and Danish influence in the history of this country is enormous. And I think we should approach the whole issue from the basis that people migrate, cultures integrate, separate, differ, and are complicated, and a multicultural society requires, as the very basis of that, understanding the differences, respecting those differences, and being prepared to live alongside those differences. But we have in this country an ability at self-delusion which is second to none around the world. A year ago, you could find almost nobody who wasn't totally in favour of the Olympic Games because they'd come to London and it was a multicultural city, and it was the multiculturalism of London, the support of Nelson Mandela and so on, that won us the Olympic Games. Aidan Burley sent out his fairly absurd message about multiculturalism and got slapped down by just about everybody. And then exactly 1 year later, the Queen came here yesterday and made a speech, and she says, my government will bring forward a bill to further reform Britain's immigration system. The bill will ensure this country attracts people who contribute and deters those who will not. And from that stems a whole series of measures about denying recently arrived people access to health care, access to public services, visitors access to the National Health Service except in case of extreme emergency, and so on. And it's a piece of legislation, pieces of legislation, that are a total appeasement of everything the BNP, the EDL and UKIP have been saying over the past year, and we have to oppose it very, very strongly indeed, and recognise the kind of society we live in and how we are going to get along together. Because if the debate is then wound up with culturalism into immigration, I'll come on to culture in a minute, I'll just say this about immigration. Had there not been substantial immigration into this country from more or less the end of the Second World War onwards, there was immigration long before that, but over many, many decades, centuries, something like that. I don't underestimate that, but the greater numbers that came after the Second World War. Had there been no immigration at all, what kind of society would this country now be? What kind of health service would you have? What kind of education service would you have? What kind of transport system would you have? What kind of place would it be? It would be a poor, windswept, wet island off the northwest coast of Europe that was achieving very little and contributing very little, and it would be a former empire in terminal decline. And it's not. It's something, it's a society that is very, very different. And all those that say there is a problem about immigration need to think very, very carefully about the kind of society that they live in and the society that they want to live in. I don't find racists complaining about Indian doctors when they arrive at an accident emergency department in great pain. I find them complaining about immigration when they have a perception that there's a shortage created by immigration or something else. And we need to turn our attentions instead to the needs of people and the sustenance of everyone's living standards, rather than allowing this to go into a downward spiral of blame, blame, blame. Now, there's a number of issues that we need to address in this, and the first one, I think, is the question of education and the debate on education within our society. Michael Gove is not a friend of mine, and we're not close on anything, and we probably don't agree very much. But I find his approach to the ideas of a teaching of history and the values that go with our history deeply, absolutely disturbing in every conceivable way. The idea that you have to teach the British Empire, the contribution of the British Empire to the world, and you have to teach a series of great literary figures from Britain in English literature. Now, I've absolutely no problem with the great figures of English literature. Shakespeare, brilliant, and many, many others. But also, Chinua Achebe was brilliant. Eduardo Galeano was brilliant. There are many, many others all around the world. I want our children to grow up in a society where they recognise brilliance in art, brilliance in literature, brilliance in science or maths or anything else does not belong to one island. It doesn't belong to one continent. It belongs to the whole globe. I want our children to grow up trying to understand the devastating impact that European colonialism had on what we now call Latin America, the devastating impact that the slave trade had on Africa, the Caribbean and North America, and indeed on this society, and also our children grow up understanding the contribution made by people all over the world and civilizations all over the world to the things that we now enjoy within our society. And so I urge everyone to get involved in this debate about the teaching of history. And I would love us to see some kind of world history idea within the national curriculum so we understand the contribution that peoples of all societies make. I also think that in debating multiculturalism, we sometimes sort of skate around and ignore the realities of what prejudice amounts to within our society. Why are the higher numbers of unemployed young people black rather than white? Why are educational achievements not uniform across all different ethnic groups, all religious groups, or anything else? I think we have to seriously deal with that issue and deal with that question of discrimination. There's a point Zita made about the campaign that she is very involved with against public spending cuts and the disproportionate effects those have on the black community within our society. We shouldn't ignore those issues. We should confront those issues in the strongest possible way that we can. And the last point I want to make is this, about laws that go through and the debate that has to take place. Now, I represent North Islington. I'm very proud to represent North Islington in Parliament. It's a mixed constituency. It has people of all faiths and none, or from all countries, and obviously UK born, and so on. And the debates that go on in what I would call a sort of social agenda debate about abortion, about equality of marriage, about issues surrounding sexuality and the approach to it, are actually quite interesting and quite intense. Now, I understand that people have very strong views on these subjects, and I think we have to separate out religious law from secular law and make sure we make that very clear. If there's a secular law passed that says it is legal and right that people of the same sex can get married as has gone through its preliminary stages in the House of Commons, then it doesn't force anyone into that. It just says it is a society that accepts that is a right for people to do that. It isn't imposing that on anybody else, it's offering that opportunity for people. And I think we have to ensure that the laws that are passed are based on the concept of a secular political system and a secular society in which it is absolutely free and just and proper that anyone should practice the religion that they wish to practice in their own way and their own values within that religion. That, to me, is absolutely fine. If we try to appease those that are on the far right of society, that are deeply intolerant, that are going around saying that they're opposing Islamification of Britain, just as much as they said they were opposing the number of Jamaicans that came into Britain, the number of Irish that came into Britain, or the number of Russian Jews that came into Britain at the turn of the 20th century, then if you start to appease those forces, you end up going down a nasty path of intolerance, division, and neo-fascism, if not absolute fascism. And this is where, what I started with, the laws that are being proposed now on immigration. Right, I'm finishing. The laws that are now being proposed on rights of people that are migrants to the society to have access to healthcare, education, and all the other things are so misplaced, so nasty, and so wrong. I want our society to be one that understands our strength is our differences. Our strength is our understanding of each other's history, culture. Our strength is our understanding of the way in which the current world came about. If we don't understand that, then we end up with a very nasty, unpleasant, intolerant society. And on a wider scale, we turn our backs on world poverty, we turn our backs on those that suffer from it, we turn our backs on those that end up being embroiled in wars because of weird ideas of cultural, religious, or any other kind of supremacy of one over the other. I'm proud to live in London. I'm proud of the multicultural nature of London. I'm not innocent to its many, many failings and the many, many problems that a lot of people face, but I think we've got something pretty good in London, in that so many people from so many parts of the world make their homes here and are able to live here and contribute to the standard of living that we all enjoy. And I'm really pleased that we're having this debate here tonight in this building. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all our panelists tonight for some very interesting and potentially controversial opinions. I guess we'll find out soon. I'm now going to open the floor for any questions and comments. If you just bear me a second, we have 45 minutes. We don't have a roaming microphone, unfortunately, so I'm going to ask you, those who do want to speak, to raise their hands and to speak for a maximum of 2 minutes to give as many people as possible the opportunity to speak. So the gentleman in the corner with the pink t-shirt.
Okay, thanks. Thank you to all the speakers. And Abdullah seemed to be the only member of the panel who named one of the elephants in the room, which is religious difference in terms of culture. And I'm sort of focusing on religion here rather than specific religion. I would ask Jeremy Corbyn MP if he thinks a tolerant society includes a church, a national church of our own, which won't accept female bishops. Is religion and human rights a contradiction in terms? Freedom of religion and freedom of human rights a contradiction in terms?
Thanks, Jeremy.
You want to ask that now? Or do you want to tell the other one at the end?
I think maybe we can take two and then we'll do it. So
I'm quite happy to, it's just you might want to get a few of them first.
Yeah, I'll get one more. The lady there.
Yes, I just wanted to say that obviously, you know, that multiculturalism is something that is very important and which we fight for. But we also have, I think we also have to spell out that behind that is anti-racism. And the fact that, you know, one of the speakers was talking about the mental health of people in the Caribbean. And I think that's very dangerous because unless the work that we've done as people of color and the struggle that we've made as people of color is laid out, we can't even talk about mental health. Because we're tortured by racism, our kids are hounded, we have to do the work of defending them from the police, our families are killed and we can't get justice. All of that is the work that people of color are doing. So we've got to spell out the reality of our lives before we, you know, to really talk about, seriously talk about multiculturalism. And we have to talk about the work that women are doing, which is to civilize society. I mean, in my family, it was the women that taught us to be tolerant and open-minded, and we have to count that work as well. That's part of the caring work that goes on. So I just wanted to spell that out and to say that there's a bishop, Sintamum, and he has also attacked lesbian and gay people, and that's absolutely unacceptable. We can't dance around and play around with issues. We all have to have our rights and our dignity respected. Otherwise, we don't have multiculturalism, we don't have anti-racism, we have, you know, killing and murder. We've launched a petition to get caring work respected and counted. And we hope that people will take a copy and sign on to that today. I'm from a group called Women of Color in the Global Women's Strike. And I'll just finish by saying that people of color, we've already paid, we worked for 500 years. Every stone in London is dripping with the blood of slavery. And also the work of people in Latin America and India all have contributed. We have every right to be here. And unfortunately, the Labour Party has been almost as bad as the Tories, because they have not stood against the attacks on immigrant people and asylum seekers. So I think we want, as women, we want our work counted, but we want our work as people of color counted. That is the way to real multiculturalism. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, on the point about the Church of England, we have, as you know, the Church of England in England, not Wales or Scotland, as an established church, and therefore its rules are to some extent dependent on Parliament. My own view is that the Church of England should be disestablished and there should not be any established religion. I want to see, as I indicated in my contribution, secular law, if you like. And in the case of the Church of England, I just think they're utterly wrong and nonsensical. If you accept the principle of women priests, which was fought for throughout the Church of England and accepted, then the logic is there should also be women bishops, archbishop, etc. It's perfectly obvious. And I find the debate in the Church of England quite bizarre on this whole thing, and I think that they should allow women priests at all levels. There is an idea going around that Parliament might legislate to enforce that on the Church of England on the basis it's an established church. What that would say or do to other religions, I'm not quite sure, because the law does not apply to other religions in the same way about gender equality within those faiths, or gender equality of opportunity for the equivalent of a priest in those faiths. But my own view is we should disestablish the Church of England and be genuine about a secular system of government and political setup in this country.
So, can I respond to that point? I felt that question was kind of partly as a result of what I said. And I just wanted to say that you mentioned, obviously, is an issue that religion contradicts human rights. And I think here's my point. From what basis do we define human rights? We know whose human rights, or what basis or criterion are we saying this is a human right, this is not a human right? And if you step into that arena, you're no longer neutral. You're now imposing or having a particular idea. Now the thing is that different religions and cultures, we have their own understandings of human rights. I mean, and no one says I don't believe in no human rights for any human. Of course, they differ, and to posit one set against another set is being partial. And if you insist that they must follow that set of human rights against their own conscience, then we're seeing this kind of, as I was telling before, this kind of almost totalitarian discourse of one law for all, one set of human rights that everyone has to agree, whether you disagree with it or not, or whatever the case might be. And I would argue that conscience is more important than sexual preference or race, because conscience, you can't choose your conscience. You can't say I'm going to choose to be a hypocrite, or I'm going to choose to not believe in God or to believe in God or whatever. You don't choose that. All right? You are convinced by it or you're not convinced by it. But you can choose to act according to it or not according to it, that's fine. You can be religious or not, but you can't choose what you think is true. And what you believe is your religion or your belief system, your way of life, defines every aspect of your personality. Your whole worldview defines who you are as a person, not just your sexual taste. That's only one aspect of a person. You want to define an entire person by just their sexual taste? That's a bit strange. Or define that person by their race? That their whole way they act, their characteristics, their psychology is all defined by just their skin colour. This is very superficial. These are superficial things. Conscience is more important. And I think just to kind of counterpoint the MP there, establishing secular law, or a secular state, secularism can't really be secular in a practice if you think about it, because the idea of, for example, of equality, the idea of free will, and of a positive morality which is not neutral, all were borrowed from religion, in this country Christianity, for example. So how are we all equal? We're all different intelligences, different strengths, different backgrounds, different abilities. According to nature, we're not equal. There are stronger, there are weaker in nature. Why do we say we're equal? Well, because according to Christianity and Islam and Judaism, we're equal under the eyes of God. As well as free will, where do we get this idea of free will from? Again, this is a religious concept. So I think I'll just finish up by saying that the laws that we're under, even in England, came from a religious legacy. There's a prohibition against incest. It's from a religious legacy. And so this is, I would say, that you can't have a pure secular state. There's always going to be partiality. There's always going to be a assumed position. And I don't think you can just say we have an absolute secular state, because I don't think that's actually possible.
Okay, so the gentleman on the right, and then afterwards the gentleman on the left-hand side.
Well, I would like to thank Abdullah al Andalusi for raising the whole issue of cultural relativism. I entirely disagree with your conclusions. Indeed, it seems to me that one of the criticisms of some multiculturalism, a kind of lazy multiculturalism, made often by people like Southport Black Sisters, of course, is that it ends up with a cultural relativism where you can't say anything about any other people's culture because it's their culture. So it's perfectly all right for women to send their girls back to Somalia to be cleaned, an issue which is in the news right now quite a lot. The only solution to this, I'm afraid, is universal human rights, and they are not in any sense secular, they are actually human.
Yeah. And the gentleman on the
I'd like to address the two gentlemen who just spoke. Well, I don't know how about you, but I believe that multiculturality is about being equal, not just at home because you can do whatever you like there, but in the eyes of law. So we talk about law and the rules that are set. And now let me pick on the Church of England issue. Well, you see, religion is something. Well, you take me that if you believe God, it's your reality, and not just blending religion into culture. So if Church of England is Christian, is it not? Then the Bible says no female priest, stuff like that. But it's blended. It's kind of mixing in a nasty way religion with culture. And now I can give you an example of that, how it works in the UK. Obviously, well, you may be familiar with that yourself. I ride a scooter. I want to tag my scooter, and it's just winter day. It's cold. I keep my helmet on, and the guy from the shop is telling me you need to remove your helmet unless you don't tag. So okay, I tag with my helmet removed, and approach him. Why did you ask me? And he says something ridiculous, for security reasons. And I asked him back, and if there was a veiled person, would you raise the same issue? Would you ask her to remove her veil? No, he said no. So I said, why this hypocrisy? So, do you get me? I'm addressing Abdullah about it. What do you have to say to that?
Thank you for your contribution. Before you respond, I would like to give this lady the opportunity to speak and then you can respond.
Yes, hi, I'm Gloria, and I would like to talk about what Nayo, you talk about mental health. You talk about mental health?
Yes.
Yes, mental health. I think mental health is a very, very important issue because it's called the migrants' mental health, which is the Ulysses syndrome. You're right, they are confusing the migrants who are here many years, who doesn't understand the way because they hasn't integrated into the country and become mentally ill, and they're confusing them with another mental kindness, and that people are prescribing as being crazy. Those people, what they need is to have seen in a different way, and people are sent back to countries like Colombia, like other countries. I've been with them. These people need some also help, and I think you're right, but we need more to stress more about the problematic that in this country hasn't been agreed yet. So it's very important. It's very expensive and very large. So So I like talking about that, but I would like to hear more about what you spent, because it was very short, I mean 6 minutes going now. It's a very important issue, going back to the lady there. And also I agree with my friend here about right, this country is like multiculturalism, and this country is a big diversity country. But the question is what happened on Brixton riots, 1981, the clash between the black people with the white police, and what happened in 2011, that was nationalist. So the question would be, I suppose, for Jeremy Corbyn to answer that.
Thank you.
I would like to give Nigel the chance, and Jeremy and Miriam another chance to respond to the comments if they would like to come and say, and I'll come back to more people, or if they would like to respond to the comments that were made by the two gentlemen earlier.
On the question of equality in laws and the basis of them in religion, well, yes, I suppose all laws have some basis in religious thought in some ways. A lot of law is based on Judeo-Christian traditions. Yes, there are a whole lot of issues there, but I go to the point that Andy made over there, that surely the real issue is that we should run a society on the basis of the universalism of human rights. And if you read quite carefully both the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the European Convention on Human Rights, it quite specifically suggests that there has to be respect for the practicing of religious faith. It also quite specifically says that everyone should have rights within society and defines what those rights are. Is it wrong to do that? No, I don't think so. All of us in this room, in some way or the other, have benefited from both those things and those conventions. And I find it quite extraordinary that we're now getting involved in debate here in Parliament about withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights, essentially on the basis of a racist agenda concerning immigration and right to family life and family union, which is specific within it. So I think you have to understand where everything comes from. But if we do live, as we do, in a society where people practice all kinds of religions, and the census of 2011 indicated that about 60% of the population of the UK define themselves as Christian, 28% with no religion at all, 4.5% Muslim, 1.5% Hindu, and other religions 1% or going down from there. So there is obviously a big multiplicity within that. Everyone should be allowed to practice their own religion, but not at the expense of the rights of other people. That was surely the boundary line that we have to draw.
Thank you. Just before, yes, I might like to respond to Abdullah.
Yeah, since I'm going to speak in a second, I just thought I'd get this in. I just want to make 3 points. One of these, I can't choose my sexuality. I can't choose my race or the colour of my skin. But my conscience may tell me that the world will be a better place without people who've got mental and physical disabilities, and therefore it's okay to exterminate them. You are saying that conscience is more important than those other two things, and I think that is a totally dangerous and ridiculous thing to say.
Give everybody a chance. The gentleman here with the glasses.
Right, a lot of points to get through. Okay, when it comes regards to cultural relativism, or whether I was advocating cultural relativism, I mean, when I said that the kind of multicultural system I would advocate would be how Islam gives a plurality to people to live by according to their law systems. Islam is not relativist, but rather it just believes that not imposing on people. That's all I'm really advocating is don't impose on people your own ideas or whatever you think is right and wrong, because people have different ideas as to what is right and wrong. As to criticizing other cultures, I didn't say you can't criticize Islam. My organisation, Muslim Debate Initiative, we actually initiate debates and we bring people to criticise Islam. We even had, BNP, we've debated the EDL, we've debated a whole bunch of people on platforms, and they've criticised Islam, and we're happy for that to happen as long as we get a response. So I'm okay with criticizing Islam and on religion and things like that. I mean, of course, someone could counter, devil's advocate here, someone could counter, like a fascist could counter that. Their prohibition against them criticizing, members of different races is a prohibition on them criticizing, and they could argue that, well, why can't we criticize? So there are taboos as to what we can or what we can't criticize. Just because you can't criticize something does not necessarily mean it's bad to have that idea. It's what you're actually criticizing or not. As for universal human rights, they're just known because we're human. Well, let's have a look at that. So all humans deserve to have freedom, right? What about criminals? They're still human. They haven't changed from being human, but you put them in jail based on what they've done. See, so there's an issue there. What about freedom of ownership? Well, 1% of the population of the planet own 50% of the world's assets due to concentration of wealth from a capitalist system based on freedom of ownership, or the human right freedom of ownership. What about the prohibition of polygamy, for example, in this society? This society is based on human rights. Why aren't you allowed to engage in polygamy if it's all consensual? This is my only point is just to kind of show you that we're thinking in a box. I'm just trying to expand those boundaries a bit. That human rights is not self-evident because everyone disagrees as to what is human rights or what rights humans should have. I'm glad the MP admitted that laws are based on religion or ultimately based on religion. Hence, they're not really secular in its truest sense.
I'm going to have to cut you off, Abdullah. If you could keep it short, so we can. There's a few people who've got their hands raised, so maybe you can.
Sure, 20 seconds.
Yeah.
As to the point raised by the gentleman there was about we should be equal, but the thing about humans is that we always discriminate. So when you choose your partner, who you get married to or who you have just a casual relationship with, you discriminate. It's going to be either same gender or opposite gender or whatever. People who never countenance having a relationship with someone of the same gender, you discriminate in your own private life. Everyone discriminates. The point is that I'm advocating that people should be allowed to engage in actions according to their conscience, and as I will caveat it, as long as they're not killing people. That was my point, right? I'm not advocating you should follow your conscience to kill people. I think that's taking my argument to its absurdity. I'm just saying that we have a right to live according to our conscience, because the opposite of that is that you're going to force people against their will to do things they don't believe in. And is that the kind of society, the alternative society you're trying to advocate? I don't think any of us believe in that. So that's my point.
Thank you. Okay, so the gentleman here, and then the lady, and then I think you want to say something, and then I'll come to you in the back of the room. So the gentleman here.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to congratulate the Prisma for organizing this event.
Can I ask you to speak up?
My name is Paul. I'd like to thank the Prisma for organizing this event. I must consider that all the panelists agree that multiculturalism is alive and kicking, as one of the panelists said, so I don't see a real debate about that here. But what I really want to talk about is how we're going to defend multiculturalism, as the lady there mentioned. Because for me, it's clear that this country is made of people who come here and contribute so much to this society. And at this very, very time, multiculturalism is being attacked by the government and all the politics that they're implementing at the moment. So how are we going to defend that? I think we need to make sure that people are engaging. And how are we going to make sure that people are engaging in real politics? Because it seems to me that at the moment, the options that we have with the political parties as they are there, they're not expressing what people really feel or what people really want. So the question for me is how we engage young people or even the people who have come to this country from other societies into participating in politics, and because who controls the power is the ones who make the decisions. So that's the question. I would like to address that question to the lady there.
Okay, before you answer, just say the lady over here.
Thank you. I think my contribution to the debate will be to say that multiculturalism has to begin at home. A lot of people have said here of equating multiculturalism to immigration, as in the people who bring in their culture are people from other parts of the world. And that statement in itself excludes the millions of people who are British but not white. So as a black British person, when I hear people talking about multiculturalism and not relating it to the indigenous population who are not white, that in itself is anti-multiculturalism. So I'm writing a book at the moment of well, the working title is in Memoirs of a Black British Person, because there are millions of people who are black, Asian and British and are not recognised as that, who are thought of as immigrants because of the colour of their skin. The riots in 2011 is proof of this problem propagating, because there are children who are growing up British but are not recognised as British and don't feel British because the establishment rejects them. So I would just like the panellists to comment on multiculturalism being at home with British people.
Thank you. Just one more comment over here and then we'll come to the response. Yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that, you know what David Cameron said about that multiculturalism in Australia? I really don't get that, because, like, say this my school, it's a Catholic school, and I remember 2 people were from England when we did in class, and then I'm from Spain myself. I was from Indonesia, India, Asia, Africa, from many different parts of the world. And I just don't get what he means that it has failed.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for
Well, the first question about how do we get people, migrant communities that have come to the UK and young people to engage in politics. Well, I'm the co-founder of an organisation called Black Activists Rising Against Cuts. We use black in the political sense to encompass everybody from the African, Asian diasporas. And this year we're running a campaign called MLK 50 Equality in Our Lifetime. And the focus of that campaign is to, one, mark the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington and ask the question, how far have we come in terms of addressing racism, in terms of creating equality or having true equality, and what can we do? We know what the answers are, but what can we do to address those issues? The whole programme of events that we're running this year include a march, a residential conference, question time events. We've got a comedy tour which is entitled Racism, You Must Be Joking. And in addition to that, what we're looking to do going forward after this year is a voter registration drive, which is aimed at young people with the general election that's coming up. One of the things I think is, you know, the point you've made about how do we engage young people, there's a lot of black people that don't vote, and when I say black again, I'm talking in the political sense. And the reason they don't vote is because they don't think that any of the mainstream parties represent their interests and won't represent them if they were elected. But one of the things that we need to turn around is for people to feel empowered by politics, and I think that starts not just by registering to vote and using your vote in an election, and perhaps you're using your vote tactically to keep the far right out rather than because you believe the person you're voting for is actually going to represent your interests, but engaging young people at a level with children in terms of school councils, in terms of young mayors. My borough has a young mayor, for example, and there's a whole committee that's elected. But people need to, young people don't want to be talked at. So we can't have an event like this, you know, that will bore lots of people, although we have got a fantastic young man here who's made a very good point and is a brilliant speaker, so it's fantastic to see you here. But we need to engage in a way that young people can relate to, but also give them the ownership about how they have those debates about politics. And I think if we look at the student movement shamed the rest of us into taking action against the attacks and austerity. Actually, they inspired the rest of us to get up and do something, because they started campaigning against EMA and the tripling of tuition fees. So I think it's there. but it's providing the facilities and the resources and the tools for that to happen, and engaging people in a way that they feel empowered, not just to use their vote, but to use their political views and express those political views, so they're not shut down and feel that their view is not going to be taken seriously. And can I answer the point that the sister over there was mentioning about in terms of multiculturalism starting at home? You know, one of the things I do in my workplace is I insist that when it's St. George's Day, yeah, that's celebrated, because I'm saying let's celebrate Black History Month, Disability History Month, LGBT History Month, etc., International Women's Day. But actually, why are we allowing the far right to claim St. George's flag and use that as a symbol of fascism? Actually, it shouldn't be. But in itself, the far right haven't figured out that actually George himself was multicultural, yeah, and of mixed parentage from the history I've read, and you know, part European, part African, Middle Eastern. So if you look at his history, it's funny that the far right have decided to celebrate him and try and take ownership of him, because they haven't bothered to look up where he came from and what he was about.
Thank you very much. I know Claudia wants to respond to Abdullah before we come to the more questions.
I think we have to be aware all the risk about following the far right and neo-Nazi agenda of putting, for example, issues of immigration, controlling border, security, and so on. And in order to misguide us about the debate or taking seriously the topic of multiculturalism in this country. Just for example, David Cameron is now being more trying to follow more the agenda of Farage, following the success election at the regional level. So we need to recover a place for the discussion of multiculturalism. No politician at the moment, either the coalition or the political parties, mention the M word. Nobody. So everybody is talking about social cohesion, integration in different ways, national unity, etc. But what about multiculturalism? It's now hidden. So I think we have to address this issue seriously here and also in other places. Moving to the other thing, other issue discussed here, I think consciousness is important, but it's not everything if you don't take into account other people who don't think like us. So differences are important to take into account in order to create an environment where we are in dialogue with the other, with all people who think differently to us. That's why human rights is important to take into account. We cannot move away from human rights because this integration is two-way street. It's not just one direction. You cannot ask for the people accepting our views. You have to also accept other people's views. That is the key aspect of living in a plural society. And also, I would like to point out that multiculturalism is not just celebrating differences. It's not just the models, so-called 3S models, saris, samosas, and street band. That model is not actually what is properly multiculturalism. As the philosopher Kingsley and other people who have made research about the multiculturalism in Europe and in Canada, where successfully they have been put as officially as a policy by the Canadian state. So we need to be careful about distinguishing what's exactly multiculturalism. Is it not salad bowl? Is it not melting pots? Multiculturalism is about a civilized dialogue. It's about rights of the people, especially for minorities, especially for people who are coming to live in a country, to incorporate to the mainstream society, contributing with jobs, contributing with culture, contributing with diversity.
Okay, so there's a gentleman there with a black jacket and then the gentleman's
To say multiculturalism has failed is the same as saying diversity. It's the same as saying diversity in animal species has failed. Beautiful euphemism to take away our responsibilities of destroying our planet. I am a musician. My neighbors used to say to me how good musician I am. I thank them, but it didn't lead me to sing, to see myself coming all the way from Peru to play in the Royal Albert Hall. But when Teófilo Álvarez, well-known musician, he used to conduct many of the very important symphonic orchestras around the world, tell me once in the conservatoire, Jamie, why don't you leave politics and focus in music? You would be a great musician. That was important to me. So when Mr. Cameron said multiculturalism has failed, can he back up? Don't worry, Mr. Cameron, if government multiculturalism has failed. Life is intelligent enough to amend your honest and not honest, if any, mistakes.
Thank you. The gentleman is
I'm Ikhar Ali, and I would like to say that we are living in a tiny global village which is multicultural, and Britain is part of that village. Abdullah talked about Sharia law, but not a single one can talk about state-funded Muslim school. I've been campaigning for state-funded Muslim school for the last 40 years. I set up the first Muslim school in '81, and now Muslim community has got 188 schools, and only 12 schools are state-funded. I would like to see each and every Muslim child in a state-funded Muslim school. What the panel think about it?
There's one more gentleman next to you, and then...
Hi there. I'd just like to say I see two clear distinctions here. I see multiculturalism and integration. And multiculturalism, I think, is, we all agree, it's very beneficial. It makes the country more interesting, open-mindedness. It's helped build the country. It's positive, dynamic. The integration, I think, has failed. And that's I'm not talking about us because a lot of the people here are thinkers, they're contributors. But I'm talking about on a grassroots level. I think it's failed in two parts, because I think the state has a responsibility, but then also cultures have a responsibility. If you come into the country, as I have done, I think it's disrespectful not to appreciate the history of the country and to, I mean, it's a great country. I would never kind of bring my point of view and say this is how it must be done. I think that in order to be multicultural, you bring the culture and also celebrate the host culture. So I think respect is needed and acceptance of your culture and where you live, the rules where you live, and other cultures as well. And then the state, I think there's integration has also failed because there's some dangerous things that are cloaked as human rights. Political correctness is very dangerous because it's masking, it's what you can and can't say. And words, I know I'm from South Africa, and one of the things that I miss is how we communicate, call a spade a spade. Actions speak louder than words. Whereas over here, certain things, like if I've got a black mate at home, I'll say, oh, my black mate. Whereas over here, I'll feel a little bit more worried about saying it, because people judge on words and not necessarily actions. And then the final thing that I think is, it's easy to have a patronizing view on multiculturalism. And I think you need to actually get to the grassroots level. And okay, I'm moving to integration. I think it has failed for, say, the hypothetical situation of the young boy who's had a great upbringing, say in Ghana, and who arrives. His introduction maybe is on some estate, and then he is targeted, and that section, the state does not look at that. That is not the realm in which politicians walk about it. That's not the reality they know. They don't take the whatever number bus at a certain time. They don't see that. And I think you need to have some strict laws on antisocial behavior. You have to be strict, because otherwise fresh people, innocent people come in from the system. And imagine you're a young kid, you come in, your perceptions are Africa, you come in, suddenly there's Britain and your reality is the States, and say in benefits, it's very difficult to break out of that mold. So I think a lot of focus is needed. You need to call a spade and say, listen, we've got a problem on the grassroots level, and we need to kind of look at a way of uplifting that.
I don't know if anyone has much to respond to this.
Thanks for your point about integration. There's two strands: there's multiculturalism and there's integration, and so on. And you said that basically, people shouldn't come into a country, or people shouldn't be in the country and say this is how things must be done. But I think you described most politicians, because that's what they do. This is how things must be done. And if you say that when you come to this country, you don't have a right to say how things must be done, but we, the indigenous people, have a right to say what must be done, then we're actually causing a distinction. And we're saying that, as long as you're a citizen of a country, in theory, anyone has a right to say what must be done. As long as you don't get a gun or a bomb or start killing people to do so, you can express your mind as is. And as I said, just for to reiterate what I said before, I'm not calling for Sharia in this country, but I'm just giving an advice regarding multiculturalism based on an historical model, which I think would be beneficial. The last point is, I don't think this is about multiculturalism today, and I'm hearing now race and I'm hearing sexual preference. These things are not cultural. Race is not a culture. And your sexual preference is not a culture. People can be a British person and be homosexual and black, but still be British and different from a French person who's heterosexual and white, right? Just based on the nationality, is in not the actual. Well, I've got a colour because I'm different from you in culture and so on. I think that the real problem is, and just to kind of show, also bust a misconception, is that we should view people as humans, not view them as you are defined by your skin colour, you are defined by your sexual preference. That's discrimination. That's where you start discrimination. That even the term heterosexual, homosexual is about 150 years old. Before that, they had no term for it. So they just approach people based on being human. And
Can I ask you to keep it short?
All right, sorry. So I'll just say that basically, I would advise that the Islamic perspective is to view people as humans and not categorize them as their race or sexual preference, because then that's where discrimination occurs, and that's what we have to prevent.
There is a lot of criticism of multiculturalism as a relativist. But on the other hand, we have to point out that multiculturalism is challenging the narrative, Western narrative, as the dominant and hegemonic, and the only point of reference regarding the other cultures, other races, other faiths. So that is the main issue about multiculturalism, that there is no hierarchy between cultures. When if one says that all cultures are equal, it's because we are basing this argument on the human rights point of view of the equality for all people, regardless of faith and tradition or sex and so on. So it's just to say that relativism is not really questioning in the end multiculturalism.
Mike, would you like to say something briefly?
Yeah, I want to respond to our sister here, because I thought that one of the points I was trying to make is that the multicultural society is here, and that's everybody who's here, and that all of us engage in all sorts of activity. And one of the things that most important, seems to me, is anti-racist activity. And a lot of people fight shy of, because it's problematic, you know, they might go on a demonstration, but they're not going to challenge the everyday racism that goes on. They're not going to try and understand. And I think this business about trying to understand is what makes a difference. And it doesn't matter who you are, there are people who you don't understand. I'll just offer as two examples. There's a wonderful movement started some years ago now called the City of Sanctuary, where cities have tried to, building from the grassroots level, tried to convince institutions, business people, and then eventually the local authority to turn their place into a place that is welcoming of the stranger, of the newcomer. And this City of Sanctuary movement is built across communities, across Britain. And in Bristol, for instance, I produce a magazine which tries to, I mean, I describe it as trying to create a magazine where the guy sitting in a doctor's surgery, the old white guy slagging off the Somali woman sitting across from him for being there, will pick it up and read her story and understand and change his mind, and that she will pick up the magazine and find out about the culture that has made him. And so through sharing each other's stories, so the magazine is full of human interest stories, we begin to appreciate what it is we've got to offer. So I mean, I think there are three things we can all do. One of them is engage in anti-racist activity, because that shows that we're part of a multicultural society. The other one is to find ways of welcoming people when they arrive. And the third one is to share our stories so that we understand more about each other.
Did you want to?
Every day I meet somebody I've never met before, from a place I've never heard of before, or don't know much about, and I learn something from them. Every single person knows something we don't know. Every single person has an experience we haven't had. Every person is unique and you can learn something from them. That's what makes a society strong, cohesive, and understanding of our differences, and glory in the differences, because it's not a threat, it's a plus to all of us. Thank you for coming tonight.
Before I like to thank some people from Christmas for my team. Cesar Sandino, Sandino, and Alcaroba, they were very hard on this debate. And also to Mira and Ryan, all of them, they made possible this debate. And also people, friends around like Steve Raymond, who did a lot more than he did, and Claudia Piccioni as well, and Sue, yeah. and thanks also to Jeremy to host this event. Thanks for that. And I know personally, because I always get frustrated after this kind of event, because my idea before was, okay, we are going to have 2 hours on some panelists, and I know that maybe they are a bit frustrated as well, because always 2 hours is not enough time. We would like to say we need another second part, but or another hour, because some of them couldn't say what you wanted. But you wanted to talk. You can talk, right? We can wait at least for a minute for him. Yes, at least 1 minute. Yes, 1 minute. Yeah, you can talk, because I really need to say thanks to all of you for coming, but if, you know, the rules in the parliament are very strict, please still a minute, just a minute. Can you
Okay, I'll try and sum it up in a minute. I'm a political theory master student, and I have the unadmirable task of having to write 2 essays on multiculturalism in the coming few weeks. Now, the issue that I've encountered when I come and actually approach the literature is that there are many problems. When you look at, I'm sorry, I'm going to try and sum up as quick as I can, but when you look at somebody as canonical as Will Kimlicka, a liberal thinker who tries to address the issue of multiculturalism and lay down many of its foundations, you find a distinction in his approach to the topic between indigenous national cultures, Native Americans would say in North America, against immigrants. And this creates a distinction. Now, what happens after 200, after 300, after 500 years? Are these still immigrants? There's a problem there, which I don't think has been resolved in a deep philosophical way. That's one. But you look at a canonical communitarian thinker, such as Charles Taylor, when he sets out his theory, and when he does set it out, he precludes certain cultures from even. I'm coming from a mixed race background. My father is black, my mum is white. What culture am I? And I know I'm pretty well over a minute by now, but the thing is, he precludes the possibility of emergent fluid cultures. And that's his theory on accommodate. That's why he's going to critique on that. There is, I think, a point to what I was saying earlier about this distinction between, on one hand, and I think this is the thing that this is where the challenge is. On the one hand, a sense for multiculturalism which addresses doing right things that have been done wrong. Okay, so it's kind of an affirmative action kind of sense of multiculturalism where people have been treated in a racist, discriminatory way in any sense. You can have that rectified in the framework.
Okay.
That's one sense.
Can we?
The other sense.
End of the minute. People have been going now, so it's cool. Thanks very much, everybody. It was a fantastic debate. Keep debating at home, keep debating in your community groups, keep debating in your mosques and your churches and your training centres. Keep debating, keep discussing. Security guards can go home and they